Today, we are dissecting one of the most common, yet often paralyzing human experiences: public speaking anxiety, glossophobia. I think this is a fear that, according to the source material we're looking at, affects up to 75% of the population. It often stifles careers, limits leadership, and, well, keeps crucial ideas locked away.
Indeed, and the source material offers a really compelling, almost radical perspective to combat this, which it calls engineering confidence. And it mandates moving beyond, vague platitudes and therapeutic language. It urges us to treat confidence not as this elusive, innate quality, but as a complex, analyzable system that you can deconstruct, fine-tune, and master using logic and systematic rigor.
Which really provides the intellectual foundation for our central question today. Does this rational framework of engineering confidence, does it effectively capture the essential nature of public speaking anxiety? Does it provide that actionable path forward? Or is the engineering metaphor ultimately insufficient for addressing what the text itself identifies as a fundamentally primal and emotional human experience?
And I contend that the metaphor risks some serious limitations here. By emphasizing precision and logic above all else, we risk over-rationalizing a fear that's rooted in, ancient survival mechanisms. This approach can potentially ignore the deep psychological, the relational, and the non-rational drivers of true confidence that we see in the case studies.
And I stand firmly on the side of rigor. I contend that this approach provides precisely the systematic blueprint necessary, the code, the controls, and the redundancy, to turn an elusive, paralyzing fear into an actionable, solvable engineering problem. That structure is what finally empowers the individual. So, my position is really rooted in the inherent precision of the system's approach. For too long, individuals struggling with this have been, operating without a diagnostic tool. They're told to just fly the plane, but they don't have a flight manual. The system's model is that manual. The power, I think, lies in its diagnostic capability. It moves us away from this really amorphous concept of just fear and toward concrete, measurable components. We analyze the system through 4 stages: the input, which is the trigger event, like a presentation date; then the processor, the cognitive distortions; the output, the physiological response; and, of course, the feedback loop. The power, I think, lies in its diagnostic capability. It moves us away from this really amorphous concept of just fear and toward concrete, measurable components. We analyze the system through 4 stages. The key breakthrough here is identifying the specific buggy toad. We are talking about diagnosing perfectionism or mind reading or imposter syndrome. This specificity transforms a paralyzing, amorphous problem into a solvable engineering task. For instance, the methodology borrowed directly from cognitive behavioral therapy, the 3-step catch, challenge, change process, is the only systematic way to rewrite the underlying negative belief patterns that misinterpret neutral data.
This is not soft advice. This is structured code rewriting, allowing us to predict failure modes and design targeted solutions.
I see why you think that. And I agree that the diagnostics are useful for, identifying patterns and moving toward specificity. However, let's return to the source material's own definition of the core challenge. The anxiety is defined as a primal fear that triggers an ancient survival mechanism, the acute fight-or-flight response. When the cognitive processor signals that level of danger, the body floods the system with adrenaline and cortisol. At that point, you are dealing with an embodied evolutionary response, not merely a software glitch that can be patched with logical counterarguments. The engineering framework, I think, struggles to fully account for the deep emotional and psychological work required when confidence issues touch on fundamental self-worth. Consider imposter syndrome in depth. This is not just a faulty logical conclusion, it's a pervasive feeling of being fundamentally unworthy or unqualified. And when we look at the solutions that triggered true long-term success in the material, they relied heavily on internal value shifts. Maria, the marketing manager, she found her breakthrough by reframing her purpose, shifting from a need to prove her smarts to an opportunity to celebrate her team's work. Adebayo, the startup founder, he re-anchored himself in his core mission, These are profound shifts in intrinsic motivation, in one's personal why, which are awkwardly minimized when you just classify them as debugging the processor. Let's focus on the essential hierarchy here, the order of operations within this system. I really question which toolkit principle is truly driving immediate, necessary change, especially in a moment of crisis. The source details severe physical outputs, debilitating anxiety, increased heart rate, shaking hands, dry mouth. These are the results of a body that is just overloaded. It's operating under acute duress. The interventions that manage this immediate crisis are fundamentally physiological. Methods like box breathing, which the text accurately terms the breathing governor, and power posing, those directly manage the body's hardware to manually override that fight or flight response. Adrenaline makes logical reasoning virtually inaccessible. So, isn't system calibration, managing the primal, overwhelming physical output, isn't that the essential first step, the manual override that stabilizes the hardware before we can even begin the slower work of cognitive debugging?
That is an interesting point, and I do acknowledge the immediate relief that managing the physiological output can provide. However, I would frame the hierarchy differently. The cognitive processor is the source of the malfunction. It's what sends the saber-toothed tiger message that initiates the massive adrenaline dump in the first place. What you're describing is a temporary patch. It's a tourniquet on a bleeding system, but the leak remains. If you rely solely on physical calibration without debugging the catastrophic source code, the mind reading or the catastrophizing, the system just immediately crashes again when the next benign input is introduced. The physical calming techniques only provide temporary relief if you fail to neutralize the catastrophic thought driving the panic. I mean, look again at Lena, the German PhD student.
Her anxiety was rooted specifically in imposter syndrome and the intense fear of intellectual exposure, the fear that her peers would find a fatal flaw in her research. No amount of deep breathing resolves that kind of existential threat. Her breakthrough required intellectual rigor. She had to challenge her underlying belief and create the patched thought. I am the world's foremost expert on this very specific topic. The cognitive fix was paramount because the body follows the mind's interpretation of danger.
Right, but the physical symptoms are not just outputs, are they? They rapidly become a devastating new input that reinforces the feedback loop. The text is clear on this. You notice your shaking hands, your dry mouth. That physical output is instantly processed as the new input, I'm visibly falling apart, which then validates the original catastrophic belief and leads to an even greater adrenaline spike. It's a closed system spiraling into failure. If you can manually override that panic response through a controlled physical action, like box breathing, you short-circuit that negative feedback loop immediately. This intervention, the hardware stabilization, is a necessity because attempting to apply rational logical reasoning to a brain that is saturated with adrenaline and cortisol is often, well, it's futile. Calibration stabilizes the system so that cognitive debugging can occur. It's the prerequisite.
That's a highly functional perspective on crisis management, I'll grant you. But it fails the test of long-term system design. A rigorous engineer knows that relying on manual, high-effort overrides for common events indicates a fundamental flaw in the architecture. You're creating dependence. The entire goal of the systems model is to ensure the individual is not perpetually dependent on a series of elaborate physical techniques every time they face a benign trigger. The structured catch-challenge-change process ensures the system learns. It updates the core programming so that the next neutral input, say an email confirming a presentation date, sends a realistic, balanced message to the body, making the physical alarm far less likely to activate in the first place. The physiological controls are a good emergency measure, but the only scalable, sustainable solution is to fix the faulty logic driving the threat interpretation.
A strong system is resilient. A system requiring constant manual calibration is weak.
But your structured logic, the catch, challenge, change, it often operates on a completely different timescale than the primal reaction. We're not just debating efficacy, we're debating the nature of the fear itself. If the fear is, as the source suggests, primal, an ancient mechanism, it resists modern systematic logic precisely because it operates outside the rational cortex. The deepest change often comes not from logical refutation, but from exposure and habituation, which requires the physical system to be stable enough to withstand the discomfort repeatedly. By prioritizing the physical controls, we manage the threat response long enough for the brain to learn that the environment is survivable, which slowly erodes the primal fear's influence.
Moving to our second core contention then, the relative importance of control and redundancy versus, say, connection and human interface. I maintain that the power of the engineering model is its ability to provide critical fail-safes and redundancy. That's what transforms the overwhelming fear of the unknown into a profound, actionable sense of control. Think of Adebayo, the Nigerian startup founder, pitching to high-stakes investors. He overcame paralyzing pressure not just through motivation, but by systematically mitigating risk. He created an exhaustive objection handling document, a comprehensive failsafe that cataloged and prescripted responses for every potential difficult question. This preparedness eliminated the stress of the error state, the fear of being publicly stumped. He converted the vast uncertainty of the Q&A into a feeling of deep, reliable preparedness. That is pure systematic reliability design.
I come at it from a different way. While preparation and redundancy are undeniably essential, that's just professionalism, the source itself moves outside the strict bounds of the system metaphor when discussing interfacing with external systems. It emphasizes the psychological shift required to see the audience not as a judging panel, but as adversaries to allies. That's a relational choice. The primary solution proposed for this interface, the lighthouse technique, which involves delivering a full thought to one person before moving on, is fundamentally about establishing a series of genuine one-on-one connections. It requires the speaker to define the user need, to inform, persuade, inspire, and then turn the high-stakes event into a human dialogue, not a mechanical performance. How does the concept of leveraging genuine emotional connection, as Maria successfully did, fit seamlessly into a toolkit focused on precision and rational control? You can't engineer charisma.
I disagree that it moves outside the metaphor. The connection interface is part of the systematic design, and its success is measured by the delivery of value. An engineer designs an interface, a dashboard, an algorithm based entirely on user needs to maximize functionality and minimize friction. When Adebayo prepared his objection handling document, he wasn't just creating scripts, he was anticipating the user needs of the investors, their skepticism, their focus on metrics. His systematic solution was designed to meet those complex external demands. And Kenji, the Japanese engineer, offers a compelling refutation of your emphasis on charisma. He didn't have charisma as his strength. His solution was purely systematic. He created highly detailed, visual slides with clear graphs as his primary failsafe. He systematically shifted his focus from the buggy code of perfectionist grammar judgment to delivering clear, actionable data that met his colleagues' need for technical insights.
But the ultimate metric of Kenji's success was his colleagues appreciating the clarity and the value of the data, which is not a purely rational assessment. That requires human acceptance, rapport. If Kenji had delivered technically perfect data in a condescending way, the system would fail because the human interface broke down. You're trying to classify the establishment of trust as just an input-output function, but the shift from adversary to ally is fundamentally psychological and relational. Tell me, which line of code dictates the value of vulnerability over proving smarts, which was Maria's breakthrough? That moment hinges on a shift in personal values and emotional transparency, which no logic system can reliably mandate. When a pitch deviates and an investor raises an emotional critique, Adebayo's prepared document becomes useless. His success then depends entirely on his ability to adapt and empathize, skills that are honed through psychological growth, not algorithmic refinement.
The beauty of the system is its adaptability, precisely to handle those human elements. The system includes prototyping, which is iterative testing against human responses. That objection document isn't static. It's a living prototype that evolves based on feedback. And even vulnerability can be systematically deployed. Maria chose vulnerability as her interface design because she diagnosed that the user need, the audience, required authenticity, not perfection. She engineered her approach to maximize connection reliability. The framework is flexible enough to contain the messy human element by defining its desired outcome, connection, trust, and systematically building steps to achieve it.
And yet that very flexibility means the core success relies on non-rational factors. We acknowledge the strength of Adebayo's preparation, but his anchor was his company's vision statement, a mission-driven purpose that transcends mere logical defense. That deep commitment to mission, the intrinsic motivation, is the engine that allows the system to run. Without that psychological foundation, the most detailed engineering fails because the operator lacks the fundamental will to face the challenge. The engineering toolkit is indispensable for execution, but the will to execute is often found in the primal emotional roots we're trying to over-rationalize.
The value of the engineering confidence model, as we've discussed, really lies in providing a rigorous, actionable path forward. By offering a common language, a clear toolkit, diagnosing buggy code, prototyping solutions, installing redundancy, it allows individuals to shift their identity. They move from being passive victims of anxiety to active architects of their own confidence system. And this reframing of fear as a solvable structure is, I think, immensely empowering because it provides control where none was perceived before.
That's a compelling argument for control, but we must maintain that the deepest and most impactful transformations, as we saw in the source material, often required a fundamental, non-rational reframing of purpose and a conscious, vulnerable choice to genuinely connect. Maria chose to celebrate her team's success. Adebayo anchored himself in his vision statement. These are psychological shifts concerning intrinsic values that ultimately transcend the limits of a purely mechanical system framework. We have to acknowledge that confidence, while certainly built and supported by engineering precision, fundamentally requires profound psychological shifts.
Indeed. What our discussion confirms is that understanding and mastering public speaking anxiety requires a truly nuanced perspective. We can't succeed by merely addressing the physical symptoms, nor can we succeed by relying solely on rational logic when facing a primal fear. True mastery integrates the systematic logic and predictive control sought by the engineer with the necessary acceptance and management of the fear's deep, human, non-rational roots. There is certainly much more to explore in how these two powerful principles interact.